3:11 p.m. Israel Standard Time, 1511. Daf Yomi Tractate Makos, page 16b, top of the page with the words Hasam Gavra Bar Tashlumin Hu Vishibuda Degerhu Dekapaka. The Gemara answers, there the man who appropriated the collateral is liable to remit monetary payment, and it is only that the lien of the convert on the property has lapsed, as there is no one to receive payment. Therefore, he is not flogged, based on the principle one is not both flogged and liable to pay restitution. Amar lo sicha lepeat v'gomer le'ani v'lager la'azov odam v'gomer. The Gemara asks, but isn't there the case of pe'ah, where there is a prohibition, as the Merciful One states, you shall not wholly reap the corner of your field. Leviticus 23:22, followed by the mitzvah, to the poor and the convert you shall leave them. Leviticus 23:22, Dimishkachas le'v'kiyamo v'lo kiyamo bitlo v'lo bitlo d'tnan mitzvat pe'ah להפריש מן הכמה לא הפריש מן הכמה מפריש מן העומרים לא הפריש מן העומרים מפריש מן הכרי עד שלא מרח מערכו מעשר ונותן לו. And you find one liable to receive lashes in those cases, both if the criterion is whether he fulfilled the mitzvah or did not fulfill the mitzvah, and if the criterion is whether he fulfilled the mitzvah or he did not nullify it, as we learned in a Braita. The mitzvah of pe'ah is to separate it from the standing grain still growing from the ground. If he did not separate it from the standing grain, but reaped the entire field, he separates a portion from the sheaves as pe'ah. If he did not separate it from the sheaves, he separates it from the pile, where one places the kernels after threshing, before he smooths the pile. Once he smooths the pile, the produce is considered grain, from which one is obligated to separate trumot and tithes. If he already smoothed the pile before designating the pe'ah, he tithes the grain in the pile and then gives the pe'ah to the poor person. Once he grinds the kernels into flour, he no longer separates pe'ah. Rabbi Yishmael de'amar af mafresh min ha'isa u'Rabbi Yishmael nami mishkachas la de'achal isa. Apparently, it is possible to nullify the possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah of leaving pe'ah by grinding the grain. Why then did Rabbi Yochanan omit this case from his list of prohibitions rectified by a positive mitzvah for which one is flogged? The Gemara answers that Rabbi Yochanan holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that one separates pe'ah even from the dough. He maintains that the possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah of pe'ah is never nullified, as one may separate pe'ah even after grinding and kneading. The Gemara challenges this by saying that according to Rabbi Yishmael, you also find a way to nullify the possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah in a case where one ate the dough. Ela zos ve'od acheres aha aval ones lo tehecha amrinan al dat rabim en lo hafara ledat הרשות, אבל לדבר מצווה יש לו הפרה. Rather, The Gemara retracts its previous understanding on the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. We have only this mitzvah and another where one would be flogged if not for the relevant mitzvah. The term "this" is in reference to the sending away of the mother bird and the term "another" is in reference to this halakha of Pe'ah. But in the case of a rapist, no. The possibility of remarrying the rape victim whom he divorced is not nullified, even if he vows on the basis of the consent of the public. Where do we say that a vow on the basis of the consent of the public has a nullification? It is only in a case where one seeks nullification of the vow for the purpose of the matter that is optional, meaning not a mitzvah. But if one seeks nullification of the vow for the purpose of a matter that is a mitzvah, even a vow taken on the basis of the consent of the public has the possibility of nullification. In the case of the rapist, he could seek nullification of his vow to enable him to fulfill the mitzvah of remarrying his divorcee, and therefore the vow can be nullified. Ki ha-de'ahu makre darnake Dali pasha bi'enoke adre ravacha b'adre ravina delo ashtakach didai kamate. The Gemara relates an incident that proves this point, as this happened in that incident where there was a certain teacher of children who was negligent in his supervision of the children, and Rav Acha vowed on the basis of the consent of the public that he would no longer be allowed to teach children. And nevertheless, Ravina restored him to his position because no other teacher was found who was as accurate as he. Apparently, even a vow taken on the basis of the consent of the public has the possibility of nullification if that nullification is sought in order to fulfill a mitzvah. ואוכל לבילוס וטרייפוס, שקעת צמור מעשי וכולי, אמר רב יהודה, היימה דאכל בניתה, דבי קרבה, מלכינה למשום שולט על הארץ. ההוא דאכל בניתה דבי קרבה ונגדי רב יהודה. The Mishnah teaches and one who eats an unslaughtered animal, or bird carcasses, or trephot, or repugnant creatures, or creeping animals, is liable to receive lashes. Rabbi Yehuda says, one who eats a fish-like creature found in the furrows of a field, formed by a plow, benita Devei Karava, we flog him due to violation of the prohibition. Creeping animals that creep on the ground shall not be eaten. Leviticus 11:41. That's this week's Torah portion. The Gemara relates there was a certain person who ate a fish-like creature found in the furrows of a field formed by a plow, and Rabbi Yehuda flogged him. Amar Abaye achal putita elo ke'arba. Abaye says, one who ate a putita, what's that? It's a creeping animal found in the sea, is flogged with 4 sets of lashes. Wow. There are 2 prohibitions stated with regard to creeping animals in the sea, and any that do not have fins and scales in the seas and in the rivers, you shall not eat of their flesh. Leviticus 11:10-11. And any that do not have fins and scales you shall not eat. Deuteronomy 14:10. In addition, there are 2 other prohibitions stated with regard to creeping animals in general. You shall not render yourselves detestable with any creeping animals that creeps, neither shall you render yourselves impure with them. Leviticus 11:43, for a total of 4. Nimala lo kechamesh, mishum sheres hashoret al haaretz. If one ate an ant he is flogged with 5 sets of lashes. In addition to 2 prohibitions stated with regard to reproductive creatures in general, he is also flogged for violating the prohibitions creeping animals that creep on the ground shall not be eaten. Leviticus 11:41. And all creeping animals that creep on the ground, you shall not eat them. Leviticus 11:42. And neither shall you render yourselves impure with any manner of creeping things that crawl upon the ground. Leviticus 11:44. Tzira. If one ate a wasp, he is flogged with 6 sets of lashes. If one ate a wasp, he is flogged with 6 sets of lashes. In addition to the 5 prohibitions violated by one who eats an ant, he is flogged with an additional set of lashes due to the violation of the prohibition with regard to winged creeping creatures. And all winged creeping creatures are impure for you. They may not be eaten. Deuteronomy 14:19. Amarav Achai Ham Shahed Nekavav Omer Mishum Lo Tishaksu Amarav Mama Yehai Mandishasi Bekalna De Umana Kavar Mishum Lo Tishaksu. Achai says one who delays relieving himself through his orifices when the need arises violates the prohibition of you shall not make your souls detestable. Leviticus 20:25. Rav Bivi bar Abaye says one who drinks from the horn of a bloodletter through which blood has passed violates the prohibition of you shall not make your souls detestable. Amar Rava bar Rav Huna Risebti shanim malim behavi echad chai ve'ashlima nechazayis lo keshesh 5 mishum bria ve'echad mishum kezayis nevela Rave Amar Rabbi Yohanan Afilu shnayim vehu Yosef Amar Afilu echad ולא בלי הברב די be'ezutre. Rava bar Rav Huna says, if one crushed 9 ants and brought another one that was alive and thereby completed their measure to an olive bulk and ate them, he is flogged with 6 sets of lashes, 5 for eating an entity for which one is flogged 5 times, as stated above, with regard to one who eats an ant, and 1 for eating an olive bulk of an unslaughtered carcass altogether. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says, even if he ate 2 crushed ants, and the ant that was alive, he is flogged with 6 sets of lashes. Rabbi Yosef says, even if he ate 1 crushed ant, and the ant that was alive. The Gemara comments, and they do not disagree. This case where Rava and Rabbi Yosef say that he is flogged for eating 1 or 2 crushed ants, and 1 that is alive is referring to large ants, which together amount to an olive bulk. And in that case, where Rava bar Huna mentions 9 ants, is referring to small ants, as a greater number of ants is required to constitute an olive bulk and render him liable. Consequently, there is no halachic dispute in this case. Achal tevel masarishan kule amarav achal tevel shemasashin loike. The Mishnah teaches that among those flogged is one who ate untithed produce, or first tithed produce, whose truma of the tithe was not taken. Rav says, if one ate untithed produce from which truma and first tithe were separated and poor man's tithe was not separated, he is flogged. Kiman Ki Aitana, Ditanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Achol Lo Yehev Chayav, and Ala Tevel Shelo Huram. Mimenu Kol Hikar, Huram Mimenu Truma Gedola Velo Huram, Mimenu Maaser Rishon, Velo Maaser Sheni, Ve'afilu Maaser Ani Minayin. The Gemara explains, in accordance with whose opinion did Rav issue this ruling? It is in accordance with the opinion of this Adam, as is taught in Praita, that Rabbi Yossi says one might have thought that one is liable for eating only untithed produce from which no gifts were taken at all. But if Truma Gadol was taken from the produce, but first tithe was not taken from it, or if the first tithe was separated but not second tithe, or even if only poor man's tithe was not separated, from where is it derived that the halachic status of the produce is that of untithed produce, and one is liable for eating it? Talmud Lomar, Lo tuchal lechol bisharecha, Lo tuchal lechol bisharecha. וגומר להלן הוא אומר, ואכלו בשעריך, מסביהו מה להלן מעשר עני, אף כאן מעשר עני, והמלך מנה לא תוכל. The Braita continues, it is derived from the verse, as the verse states, you may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your oil, Deuteronomy 12:17. And there it states, and you shall give to the Levite, to the convert, to the orphan, and to the widow, and they shall eat within your gates and be satisfied, Deuteronomy 26:12. Just as there with regard to the phrase, and they shall eat within your gates, it is referring to poor man's tithe. Here too, you may not eat within your gates is referring to produce in which there is poor man's tithe, as it has not yet been separated, and the merciful one states a prohibition, you may not eat it. Amar Rav Yosef, Katanai, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ein tzarich likrot et Hashem al maaser ani, asher demai v'chachamim oimrim. Rabbi Yosef said this matter is subject to a dispute between Tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer says one need not separate by means of calling the name upon poor man's tithe of doubtly tithed produce, which is divine, with regard to produce purchased from an Aharetz, meaning one who is unreliable with regard to tithe. There is a rabbinic ordinance requiring one to separate first and the second tithe and truma of the tithe from it. Nevertheless, one is not required to separate poor man's tithe from that produce, because poor man's tithe is a monetary debt owed to the poor, and in the case of uncertainty, the principle is the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. Rabbi Eliezer holds that failure to separate poor man's tithe does not accord the produce the status of untithed produce, and the rabbis say